So welcome. This is a webinar to look at the area of Stuart, which is a new area, or been changed a bit with the redistribution. It's a pretty big area. It's a vast country district extending from Spencer Gulf along Paratiuna, Unadata up to the border with the Northern Territory. Then it goes over to Queensland and New South Wales on the east. Includes pastoral leases, unincorporated Crown lands, lake air, and part of the Simpson Desert. In the farm north, it's the main population centre since the change in redistribution, is the industrial town of Port Pirie. I'm Roger Wicks. I'm been asked to moderate this session. I live in just out of Murray Bridge on the river, but I've spent quite a bit of time in my career up in the north, so I have a little bit of idea about what goes on. However, what I've got is a number of questions to be asked, and online we have Dan van Holst Pelikaan, who's the Liberal candidate and currently Deputy Premier. Dan, Geoff Brock, who's independent and has been in Port Pirie for quite a while, and now the distribution's made life a bit different. And Andrew Wright, who's the Labor candidate. Andrew. So we might start with just getting each person to give just a 3-minute overview of what their policies are for the upcoming election. And perhaps who would like to start? Dan?
Yes, thank you, Roger. Hopefully you and everybody else can hear me. Hello, Geoff. Hello, yes. Andrew. Look, 3 minutes, of course, is not long to put a whole environmental policy out there verbally. Let me start by saying that while never perfect, no MP, no party can do all of the things that everybody would like to have done with regard to environmental policy, I am actually buoyed and very pleased with what we've done so far in our first 4 years of government. And when I compare things that we've achieved to things that have been requested of us from opposition and then through our term in government, I think that we've actually delivered on many of those things. You know, we have a very firm commitment to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 based on 205 numbers. Now I know that it's been requested that we do 75%, not 50%. We have a very clear target on many other things, including in my own area with regard to energy, which I'd be pleased to talk about, of course, as well. You know, we will be net 100% renewable energy with regard to electricity generation before 2030. And that's something that most people, when we came to government, thought could not be achieved. We will achieve it. We might achieve it in 28 or 29 even. So we're working very hard. Things that are not actually in my portfolio, but certainly very pleased with regard to our government's achievements on, include things like single-use plastics. 1 year and 1 day ago from today, we banned a range of single-use plastics. And at the time we said, look, it wouldn't be practical or reasonable to ban everything that everybody would like us to ban, but we started with single-use plastics with, you know, straws, spoons, knives and forks, that sort of thing. And we said that every year we would add to the list of things that are banned. So as of yesterday, 1 year down the track from when we brought this into place, we've banned polystyrene cups, plates, clams, the types of things that takeaway food is in. So, people back then thought, oh, you'll do this and you won't keep improving. Well, we made a commitment to ourselves and to the public that we would keep improving, and we're honouring that commitment. So, that's probably my 3 minutes, Roger. I'm very happy to answer any questions, very pleased to be on this Stuart candidates panel and love to talk more about where we're heading with our environment policy. Thank you.
Well done. And we do have some questions that we'll fill that out a bit later. So, Geoff, would you like to start?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. G'day, Dan and Andrew. How are you guys? Look, I agree with what Dan's saying there. I'm a great believer in renewable energy, and I'm a great believer in the renewable energies that's happening in the Upper Spencer Gulf and out in the outback and also the mid-north. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And with the battery storage, I think that's fantastic. And we need to, the worry that I've got is as a grandfather, and I've got 14 grandchildren, for their future. And I look at what's happening across all of Australia, the most eastern states, Queensland and that, and the climate change is happening very, very quickly. Be quite honest, I was a skeptic some years ago. I've seen the climate and the temperature change over the many, many years. But what's happening at the moment in Australia in particular, I know we're a small country compared to all the big countries overseas, but we have to do what we can do to ensure that we do the best thing and get that carbon down. I had the opportunity yesterday to talk to the Port Augusta Coast Care group of Port Augusta. Absolutely fantastic group of people there, and I was very, very impressed and very surprised at the marine life that is on one of the old bridges there. So this is the thing that we've got to do. We've got to look at the opportunities for our children going forward and the future generations after my children and have gone on. With regard to the year 2020, I think we've all got to forget the politics. I think we've all got to look at whatever we can all do to include getting away from the uses of plastic and things like that. And I had the opportunity yesterday, as I say, I'm just going back to the Coast Care at Port Augusta. They've got the concerns, and I've seen that that the plastics going into the environment and the marine life, that impacts the ecology and things like that. But I'm 100% behind that. And as with Dan, we've got to get to the renewable stage, and the sooner the better. But I still have some grave concerns that sometimes with change of governments, sometimes governments change and they change direction. And one of the things I don't want to be doing is chopping and change. If we've got we're on a journey, if it's working, let's continue doing that for the next 4 years or 5 years or even 20 years. We've got to have a plan, and we've got to be able to follow that plan irrespective of which party is in government. But certainly, as I say, I was a skeptic some years ago, but I'm now a great believer in renewable energy and climate change. And basically, I'm here to ensure that I work with both sides of politics, major parties, to get the best opportunities for my electorate, but not only the electorate of Stuart, but also regional South Australia and Australia, but regional South Australia in particular. I'm very, very passionate about that. Like Dan, he was with BP. I was with BP years ago, travelled the same areas that Dan had, and I was an area manager. I saw lots of stuff up there, and in my travels just recently, I've seen massive changes. And the other thing is we've got to make certain we don't deteriorate any further. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions later on, but as I say, I'm also, as an independent, I'm here to work with both sides of politics to get the best opportunity for all of our communities and including our future generations.
Right, thanks, Geoff. Andrew.
Good evening. Yeah, look, I think I don't agree either with I think what's been said. Certainly, the Labour Party has shown in the past that they're certainly committed to climate action. It's probably a good day for a Labour Party candidate to, I guess, go on a forum like this, because in the paper today, that commitment showed. I think a dollar amount in the way of $593 million towards a hydrogen plant that's going to be put in the Upper Spencer Gulf. And now we all know that it's going to be in Whyalla. So look, there is a commitment there. The commitment generally is to reduce CO2 emissions. Certainly South Australia is on the right track. When I left high school in the very early 90s, there was very little talk education surrounding the environment generally. I mean, and I think now my wife is a teacher, and indeed a large proportion of what kids are concerned about, and rightfully so, relates to where they live. So look, from my standpoint, I agree entirely with Geoff and Dan that it's something that does need to be, it has to continue. There's got to be continuity from one government to the other. There has to be the ongoing acceptance that if we don't do the right things now, then it will be our kids and our grandkids and great grandkids that are going to be suffering. So look, that's probably it in a nutshell. That's 2.5 minutes. I've just timed myself. 30 seconds. I was in both Port Germain today, and the issue obviously
Yes.
about is in Stuart, and Port Germain has a magnificent jetty, and indeed, you know, that probably falls under the umbrella of things that we're talking about here as well. So it is important that whichever government is in needs to, at the very least, look at the infrastructure that they have in place, and the park life that they have, as much as having a look at reducing CO2 emissions, because they're all interrelated.
Okay, thank you very much. We've covered a bit of it, but the first question was about your commitment to climate action. Northern Australia is particularly vulnerable to climate change. A good government would switch from a carbon-based system over to a clean, renewable energy system and create new jobs, and support a 2030 climate target. So what will you do practically in that space? I think, Dan, you did start on that.
Thanks, Roger. Look, the most practical thing that I'm directly involved in, of course, is our energy transition. We took some very clear policies to the last state election, and happily we're delivering exactly those policies. It is incredibly important that we transition away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy, but it's also important that we do it in a sensible, well-planned, well-managed way, that we do it without blackouts as we used to see in South Australia, and we do it without price rises as we used to see in South Australia. And some people might say to me, look, I don't care about the environment, just keep my electricity cheap. Somebody else might say, I don't care about the price, just make it as clean as possible. Somebody else might say, I run a business, I need reliability. The reality is, from a government perspective, we actually need to address all three of those things simultaneously. What that means is that, sure, you could do any one of them faster at the expense of the other two, but that would not be practical. And I'd say to people who would like to see us as a state go faster with regard to penetration of renewable energy, I'd say to those people, I just offer a caution, because these things only work when you have the overwhelming support of the majority of the population. And we saw under the previous government, blackout after blackout, including a statewide blackout, we saw ever increasing price rises. And people who initially said, yes, that's fantastic, as much renewables as possible, started falling away, started drifting off, and started saying, oh, hang on, I can't pay the bills, I can't put up with the blackouts. And nothing will be achieved in this area if we don't actually have the public in one way leading with regard to expectations, but in another way supporting with regard to ongoing commitment to where we're going. Now, happily, we have dropped the price of electricity very significantly, $421 for the average annual household bill in South Australia, massive drops in the wholesale price, which supports businesses as well. Last calendar year, 61% renewable energy penetration in South Australia. AEMO says independently that by 2025, that will be up to 78%. And of course, we've not had one blackout in South Australia due to insufficient electricity supply or grid instability. We've had them from a lightning strike or a tree falling on a line or that sort of thing. So we are addressing all three of those things at once, and very successfully, I have to say. You know, touch wood, things are going well. If we were to try and push even faster with the decarbonisation, it would come at the expense of those other two things. I'm comfortable that we are on a very, very steep trajectory by world standards with regard to our penetration of renewable energies, and it's happening in a sensible way. And I think that's a huge contribution in a very practical way, coming back to your question, Roger, about what are we doing in a real world way to move towards that 50% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030.
Thank you. You're right on time. Does Andrew, do you want to go first? I'll try and mix it up a bit. Andrew, do you want to talk about climate change and the action that you would take?
Yeah, look, I think it is predominantly about the energy transition. What's the policy from each party in respect to that, and certainly it's very clear, without sounding like a broken record, that the commitment today by the Labour Party suggests that what we certainly need to do, and I guess what we're talking about here is the area of Stuart, and what we do need to do is transition away from fossil fuels. That we do need to move into a form of cleaner energy, and the Labour Party in South Australia have looked at that and have said that yes, we're going to do it, and we're going to put it in the Upper Spencer Gulf. So so look, that is the policy. I mean, it was one of the major announcements. It was actually the first major announcement in respect to policy from the Labour Party. So
great, thanks. And Geoff?
Yes, thanks, Roger. And look, both Andrew and Dan are correct. We've got to move towards this new transition to renewable energy, but we've got to do it in a sensible way. We can't just jump from one hurdle to another straight away. We need to put stuff in place to make certain that's a gradual transition, to make certain we do it right. The other thing is we've got to make certain our industries are not impacted to the degree that it makes it unviable for them to be able to work. We've got to have this new technology. And I see that with the Upper Spencer Gulf, with the Sundrop tomato farm at just outside of Port Augusta. I see other opportunities similar to that sort of stuff there. That's using the new technologies, is using the saline water coming through the process and using their own electricity, producing their own electricity. That is terrific. Renewable energy, as Ross Garno said, the Upper Spencer Gulf is the best place in the world for any renewable energy projects. And and it's true. We only have to see what's happening now around the Robertstown area, over at Upper Spencer Gulf, and what's happening in Whyalla and all of that. I think there's a great future for the Upper Spencer Gulf, which is going to be the powerhouse and look at be the leader in South Australia towards our transition. But whilst we talk about transition of renewable energy, we've also got to remember that we've got to have vegetation, and we've got to have more trees. And because we can have all these wind turbines and solar panels and goodness knows what else, really terrific. But at the same time, we still have to have that vegetation. So I want to see our cities, our communities, Pirrie, Port Augusta and other smaller communities, have far more greening. And I'm glad to see that Dan, as a minister, has committed, if they're re-elected, $6.1 million for greening of Port Pirrie. That's a terrific thing because of our issues with our lead, and which is now out in the environment. The plant itself is doing everything it can to be new latest technology, and no emissions from that. They've got their own RO plant there, so they're actually trying to get off of the River Murray. That's another concern I've got. We are solely dependent on the River Murray, and if there's anything happening there, we are really in trouble up this way. So therefore, we've got to make certain we have that. The greening is fantastic. I love vegetation. I love trees and things like that. So again, with renewable energy, the battery storage, solar, pump solar, whatever it may be, fantastic. But we've also got to have the vegetation. So I'll be pushing pressure and make certain that looking at the opportunities and the policies of both the Liberal and the Labor parties, and I'll be digesting those. And so far, I'm seeing some good signs from both sides. And as I said a bit earlier, my process is to be able to work with them and also put pressure on them to actually, if there's something that I think and people are telling me it's a better way of doing it, I'll put pressure on both Dan and Andrew. I'm friends with both of them. But at the end of the day, we're here to make certain we get the best opportunity for our regions and our communities and our future generations.
Right, thanks, Stu. Okay, we'll just change subjects now. It's about protecting the outback and the rangelands. South Australian rangelands is a vast area, some 40% of the state, and I think you've got a bit over half of it. And it currently supports pastoralism, running of livestock, nature conservation, tourism and mining. The Marshall Liberal government released a pastoral lands bill in September 2020 with the explanatory statement which stated pastoralism will remain the primary focus and use of the land, with lessees having a duty to proactively manage the land for pastoral purposes. The bill therefore prioritises pastoralism over all other equally legitimate land users, and some of those are nature conservation as well as mining and energy and tourism. And it is proposed to wind back protections against land degradation, such as removing stocking limits and extending lease tenure length. Does the Liberal Party remain committed to this, Dan?
Yes, Roger, thank you for that question. Look, it's a vitally important thing. The statement that you read out about the primary purpose being pastoralism is with regard to the quantity of land being used. Now, every single purpose, doesn't matter what the purpose is, every single purpose must be done in an environmentally responsible way. But I think it will be, decades and decades before we would see any other land use exceed pastoralism with regard to the number of square kilometres used. I think that's just straightforward. It's not actually saying that one is more important than the other. It's just saying that it'll be the primary use. And I think that's fairly straightforward. Removing the stocking rates is actually about making it very clear that it is actually land condition that is the most important issue. And if you're in a run of seasons where you can run more stock and still have the land in tip-top condition, well, that's okay. If you have a run of seasons where you cannot run stock at all, well, that is what you will have to do, because maintaining the land in a good condition is actually the highest priority. And of course, that's true whether it's tourism or conservation, or whether it's cultural pursuits or mining, running sheep, cattle, whatever it happens to be. There are many, many very positive, very productive uses of land, and a lot of them can coexist. With regard to the bill, we put a lot of work into that, and we consulted very, very widely. And it's fair to say that we got a lot right. We got some things wrong, and we got some things in between, maybe right or maybe wrong, but either way, not good enough. And we got that message loud and clear. So we are not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but we certainly accept the fact that the version of the bill that we got to after consultation was not good enough to put to Parliament. We had no desire to jam it through, no desire to just press ahead regardless. We intend to get it as good as we can possibly get it. I've engaged with an enormous number of people because, of course, huge amount of this land is not only in the Stuart, which the three of us are candidates for, it's also in the current Stuart, which I represent, and I've got a previous long connection with the Northwest as well, which is in the electorate of Giles. So I've engaged with the sheep and cattle industry. I've engaged with people who want to have permission to graze goats. I've engaged with people who would like to remove all pastoral operations, mining companies, Aboriginal organisations, all sorts, very deeply and very genuinely from my perspective. We've done some very good work on this, but we haven't done enough. We haven't got it right enough. If we are re-elected, if the current government is re-elected, we will go straight back to that work fairly soon after the election. It is led by the Minister for Primary Industry, but of course, the member for Stuart, whoever that might be, the member for Stuart would have a very deep engagement in that policy development.
Okay, thank you. Geoff.
Good to hear that Dan has indicated that there needs further discussion on that, because I've had that many people come to me regarding that, and Dan's got far more personal knowledge and personal connection to it than I have at this stage, because Dan's been doing this the electorate for now 10 years. Dan, is it, or 12 years? I think it's 12 years for Dan. And so what I'm trying to do is get my head around the bill and its implications, and I'm getting various concerns and questions and things like that. And I'm glad that if the Liberals are put back into power, then they're going to have further discussion on that, because I think it's really, really beneficial to have as much discussion with the landowners themselves and the industries themselves. I used to travel that way with BP Australia years ago, and I've been travelling up there in the last month or so. I've seen a big difference in some of the areas up there, but at the same time, we've had these massive rains up there. But it's which is fantastic for that stuff there. But one of the things that we had a select committee onto land access onto agricultural land, including that land up the top end, by resource companies. And one of the things that recommendation was to do a protecting of our agricultural land across all of it. And we need to have, in my view, and the committee's view, to look at an audit and understand exactly what is going on, where are all the opportunities, where is the agriculture, where is the mining and resource opportunities, and all of that. So again, good to hear that Dan's going to go out for further if he's re-elected. I hope he's not going to be re-elected personally as the member, but certainly if the Liberals are re-elected, it's good to hear that they are going to have further discussion on that, because I think that some of the bills they've put through, I think they've been rushed before. They've indicated there's been a lot of consultation, but when we get down to the nitty gritty and to the grassroots people, we find that there hasn't been enough. But we've got to take those people on board, because they're the ones that are at the coalface. They need to understand, and we need to understand as MPs. We need to understand their concerns and their suggestions and recommendations.
Great, thanks, Geoff. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. I missed the actual start of the question. What was it? Was it in relation to the Aboriginal lands?
No, it was in relation to the rangelands and the pastoral bill that was put up by the Marshall government, and a lot of discussion happened after that. And what we're trying to, and there's also other uses of the pastoral land. I know pastoral land started as pastoralism, but life is moving on, as we know.
Yeah. No,
so yeah, so it's really about that pastoral bill and what you're going to do about the pastoral legislation.
Yeah, sure. Look, my notes on that obviously were that the Labour Party was entirely opposed to the bill. I'm glad, like Geoff, that Dan said that there was not enough that went into that bill, that it's going to be reconsidered if the Liberal Party do get re-elected. Then that's probably music to a lot of people's ears. Look, I think I might leave it at that. I think there's some further announcements that haven't been made, that are being made this week in respect to those things. So I might
Okay.
that up.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
Yeah. It's a bit hard unless you're the minister doing it. Okay, so we'll move now to the nuclear dump at Kimber. We currently face the federal government plan to impose a nuclear waste dump on our state, despite the opposition of the Bandangari traditional owners. Immediate level nuclear waste, which needs to be kept safe from humans. They've got two levels of waste planned for there, the small stuff, and then another one about the intermediate level. Should that be part of it, or should it continue to be stored in Lucas Heights until a permanent, deeper geological solution is in place? Who wants to start with that? Geoff?
Yeah, I'll have a shot at that first, Roger. Thanks. When the previous government were in, they asked the opposition at the time, which is now the government, would they have a discussion regarding storing of low volume or low radiation in a secure location. And that was okay for a while. Then the current government in opposition said no, there was no further discussion on that. Again, this is a very hot potato. It's an issue that I think that we've really got to face this with all the facts and figures. And unfortunately, you talk to different scientists and different people, and there's different views on this. As lay people, I don't know how we can make the decision, quite frankly, because I hear very, very disturbing issues about how it's going to be stored and so forth. The issue at that time was also about the federal process and also the state process, and it was got very confusing to the general public. The decision's been made, but it's split a community at Kimber, and I understand that some of the traditional owners there they feel as if they weren't consulted and didn't have a vote on it. So again, look, so what Dan said a minute ago about the pastoral bill, I think this needs to go back, quite frankly, and it's a federal issue. But I think it needs to go back and have far more deeper consultation and community involvement. Now, I also am told, and it's not in the new Stuart, I don't think, but it's in Giles. But I'm hearing people say that there's been massive millions of dollars improvements and extending the storage facility at Lucas Heights. If they're doing that, why are we having another location in South Australia? And the stories are going around. It's not going to be underground. It's not going to be bunkers or concrete, things like that. It's going to be basically on the ground. Now, I haven't got enough information on that, but certainly nuclear, we have to store that nuclear medicine somewhere. Currently at the moment is in hospitals and the basements and goodness knows what else. So again, it's one of those things that we don't talk enough about, whether it's nuclear power or how we store about it. It's always a taboo thing. And I think we need to have far more open discussions without being retaliation from people saying you're whatever it may be. But certainly, as Dan said on the pastoral bill, I think this is a thing that the federal government and the state government need to really have some deep, honest discussions and frank discussions about where it's going. Because one of the things I hate is what I'm hearing about how it's split a community over the other side on the west coast there. So again, I'll be guided by people far more professional and intelligent than me in that field.
Okay, Andrew, have you got any, Labor Party got any views on it? On the nuclear dump?
Yeah.
And we're talking very much about the intermediate level, not the sort of lower level.
Yeah, I've certainly gone to the party to ask them their view on it, and I'll say what I have here, and that is that the South Australian Labor Party's position is unchanged on this particular issue. The Barngarla people should have rights of veto. There's an obligation to manage domestic nuclear waste it's talking about.
Yeah.
And the SA Labour Party believes that the site selection process has been deeply flawed from the beginning. So that Labour's preference is for the current proposal to be abandoned and a thoughtful and considered process for the long-term management to be initiated.
Okay. Dan?
Thanks, Roger. Look, it might be helpful to provide a little bit of clarity on this. So just to clarify something that Geoff said, the previous state Labor government wanted South Australia to import high-level radioactive waste from other countries and store it in perpetuity in South Australia. And the Liberal Party in opposition said no to that. That is extremely different to what the federal government is pursuing, which is trying to find one national repository for low-level and potentially intermediate-level waste, which is produced and already stored in over 100 different places around Australia. So that's what we're talking about at the moment. The issue of consultation is always an important one, but I guess the challenge is when you've consulted and you've got to a position where you know who's supportive and you know who's not supportive, what do you do then? Crazy to think that you just keep going until you find 100% support for anything. That's impractical. Or if you're not satisfied, you just walk away and do nothing. That's a challenge for government, and every government, Liberal, Labor, whoever, state and federal, needs to stand up and make those decisions. With regard to where we've got to where we are, go back to the early 2000s, and the federal government wanted to do exactly this, and they wanted to pick a spot in the nation, and they picked a spot or a few spots close to each other in the Woomera prohibited area. They thought that was the best place in the nation to do it. They engaged with local landholders. Local Aboriginal people were very opposed to that at the time, and essentially it turned out through politics and a range of other things that picking a spot that they thought was the best spot and saying that's where it will be done. That process didn't work. So what the federal government did this time was they went back and said, okay, anybody in Australia who's a landholder, anyone anywhere in the nation who would like to host one of these facilities, come and tell us that you would be a willing host, and we'll work through it from then. There were 27 people, organisations that came forward all over the nation. They were shortlisted down to 6 locations. They were then shortlisted down to 3 locations, all 3 of which were in South Australia. One was a little bit away from Hawker, and 2 of them were a little bit away from Kimber. So out of 27, they shortlisted down to 3 of them. In the end, the preferred site was one of them, near Kimber, Napandi, and it is unreasonable, inaccurate to say that consultation didn't happen. It is certainly true to say that the consultation didn't get anything like a 100% support for it. The local Kimber community ended up, it was either 62 or 63% in favour of this progressing. Now, any one of us in politics would think that if we got a 62 or 63% level of support, that the electorate had strongly endorsed our election. But of course, what that means is there's still a significant chunk of the community not in favour. With regard to the Bungala people, yes, they made their view very clear. They did not want to support this, and that went through, I think, certainly one, but I believe 2 federal court processes, which actually said that they do not have a right of veto. Now, I don't have a judgment on that. Of course, I would like the Bungala people or whoever the native title holders are to be comfortable with anything that happens. But if a court says they don't have that right, for better or for worse, that issue has been resolved at least one way. So coming back, so there's, forgive me, but I think it's important to put those facts out on there for everybody. So the question really comes down to, if any one of the 3 of us are elected, whether part of a Liberal government, part of a Labor government, or an independent with a Liberal or Labor government, where do we go? Where do we stand? I've been very clear all along, as has Premier Stephen Marshall, that if all of the things that have happened, so a community and a strong majority willing to host this facility and the federal government getting it through Parliament, that then we would be open to supporting it. The changes that it needed to be made through the South Australian Parliament to happen to get there. That doesn't mean we get to decide. It just says that our team would be willing to support what's necessary to get it through the South Australian Parliament. Now, I noticed when I was reading the proposal in preparation for this, that the group leading us at the moment has actually moved away from opposition to low-level waste and is only now opposing intermediate level waste. And I was very pleased to see that, because actually Craig Wilkins, a person who's a key leader in the environmental and conservation areas in South Australia, somebody I know reasonably well and have a friendship and a good working relationship with. And I discussed exactly this quite a while ago. And I actually put it to him that maybe a good practical compromise position would be to say, well, okay, we're already storing the low-level stuff anyway. It does make sense to have one national state-of-the-art repository for that. The difference of opinion remains on the intermediate waste, which the federal government says it might want to store as well. So perhaps a sensible position would be to say, okay, we'll support the low-level waste, and with regard to the intermediate waste, well, perhaps we'll just wait until the federal government does actually want to store the intermediate waste, and then we would consider that in our Parliament as well. So look, my personal thinking is pretty well aligned to the position that I read this afternoon with regard to allowing low level and just holding off on intermediate. Holding off, in my words, I'm not suggesting that the conservation movement is just happy to hold off. I get the impression it's still in opposition to that, and I respect that. So I think I've probably overrun my,
you have
my 3
overrun.
minutes. Thank you.
But you gave some clarification, so I'll let that go. So everybody happy with that? Yes. Okay. Changing tact again. This is new gas exploration, and there's quite a bit of new gas exploration going on in the Beetaloo Basin in the Northern Territory, with the idea of then probably piping it down to Moomba and then pushing it into the eastern states, which means all those pipelines will crisscross Central Australia and some of our parks, because they always want to go in the most direct route. The International Energy Agency has stated that oil and gas exploration needs to cease by 2021. So what's your party's position on that? Do you want to start, Andrew? You got?
Yeah, sure. So I've been able to garner some information from the party in regard to that, noting that I wasn't given a huge amount of notice about this forum, but I'll answer your question. And it seems that the Labour Party is adamant that their catchphrase is they keep gas in the ground. That Labour will seek World Heritage status for the Great Australian Bight, and that essentially cements their position in regards to that particular topic.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Geoff, do you want to?
Yeah, this is a very touchy subject. I mean, obviously, Troy Bell down in around Mount Gambier way, he wanted the moratorium on any non-fractional gassing down there. We've got to balance this out, because we, at one stage, Australia was an oil producer. We used to be self-sustaining in our own oil and things like that. At the moment, we don't. We've got nothing. And we're dependent on everything coming from overseas, from Singapore or wherever it may be. So we've got to make certain we can still be able to operate our industries. We've got oodles of gas in certain areas, and I think we need to concentrate on those areas there. What Andrew indicated about the Great Australian Bight, I think that not the bight, up the top end, I think we've got to protect that, because I've got a concern. We're extracting water from the Great Artesian Basin. I think we've taken too much out, quite frankly, and that's another issue we've got to address. But certainly we've got all the resources up that way there, and it gets back to what I said about the Select Committee. One of the things is about having an audit of all the land, agriculture and non-agricultural land in the top end, all of South Australia. Yes, look, it's a real hard one to do, because if we don't keep looking for gas and oil, then in actual fact we'll be more and more solely reliant on overseas stuff to come in here. And I noticed the federal government, and they've just said that we've got plenty of storage of plenty of reserve of petroleum and diesel and things like that, but it's all kept in America. And God help us, if there's a war, what are we going to do? You only have to blockade our shores, and 10 or 14 days, we're history, basically. So it's a delicate thing, but we've also got to take the balance about the future direction and future security and sovereignty of our states and our communities. But again, there's a big issue about where it comes from and how it's extracted. And again, I would be very dependent on the professional people. As I say, I can make decisions on what people tell me. And Dan and Andrew would do the same thing. I don't think any of us are experts in this here, but certainly it's a very dicey thing, but we still got to look at the long-term security of our industries, our security, our defense and things like that, because we need to have that. Whether we keep going onto the way of hydrogen and that sort of thing there, maybe that's the way to go. But certainly I'll be open to further discussions on this, but I have a concern about the Great Artesian Basin, the extraction there. I've got a real concern about that.
Thank you, Geoff. Dan?
Thanks, Roger. Look, I can give you an answer. The position that we're taking with regard to the renewable energy transition is quite clear, and as I outlined it before, there is a practical approach to that. We're going to need gas for quite a long time, but it will be less and less and less gas. As I mentioned, AEMO says that by 2025, our energy generation will be just 22% gas, and it will continue to fall. The question is about, should we be exploring for more gas? Well, I don't think any of us really need to worry about the Great Artesian Bight. 3 companies have been gung-ho about doing that, and 3 companies have all decided that it's actually just not practical for a range of reasons, whether technical challenges or whether community opposition. So I don't see that as an issue. The 2 gas areas in South Australia are the Otway Basin in the southeast and the Cooper Basin in the northeast. I am not supportive of a ban on new exploration or new production. And the reason for that is because in South Australia, we are doing the heavy lifting with regard to consuming less gas. But the surplus gas, the leftover gas, if you like, can and still should go to the East Coast to help them transition away from coal. Now, I'm not sitting on the fence there and saying, oh, you know, use gas, not coal, and keep burning fossil fuels. The reality is that we need energy generation. We need electricity generation and energy that goes into processing at homes in a wide range of other ways. I think it's very sensible and very practical for us to say that we are leaving coal behind in Australia, that we will not have new coal generators or anything like that. But to say that we will jump straight to 100% renewables is not a practical thing either. We'll go back to the blackouts, back to the skyrocketing prices. So in South Australia, full responsibility for less and less and less gas consumption. But I also do believe that the gas that we produce in South Australia contributes to the decarbonisation of the eastern states, albeit they are 5, 10, 15 years behind us. We've already got rid of coal, we're gas and renewables, less and less gas. They're still going down that pathway, and they will actually need our gas to support them down that pathway. But 10, 15, 20 years' time, they will then be where we are, and they will be using less and less gas too. If we try and jump down that path too fast, consumers will be penalised far, far too much, to the point where they will turn against the transition, and none of us want that to happen. With regard to water from the Gab, I think what Geoff's talking about is BHP's extraction of water from the Great Artesian Basin. That's a minerals issue versus a gas issue. Some co-produced water does come with gas. If you want to, happy to go into those things, but I'll leave that for now.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, thank you. So there was this other issue that the Beetaloo Basin in Northern Territory, and to get to Moomba, you're going to cross through Simpson Desert. Is that a concern? All the pipelines will go through there. Geoff, you?
Well, again, it's wherever you find this, you've got to transport it to the, as Dan said, to whichever area needs it. The eastern states have got a concern about it, and if the deposit there is successful, yes, we have to get it to some point or other for the delivery into where it's going to go. So the only way to do that is to put some pipelines in there. And again, it gets back to the consultation about how and where and what sort of pipelines we're putting in there. I think we've got the technology today to be able, if we're going to put these, we have to transport these natural resources to somewhere. If we can do that with the newer technology and the way of the less impact to the environment, but also we've also got to take into consideration of the traditional owners. It's like my late wife is in a cemetery. I don't want anybody to disturb that. And the traditional owners have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they've got lots of beliefs and things like that. I think we've got to take that into consideration. But certainly, we have to do it in a way, because if we don't do it, then in actual fact, all that resources in there, and some parts of Australia will not be able to operate. And so it's about, Dan said about, we've got to get it to the eastern states, because we've got to decarbonise them. We've got to get them into the renewable sector. And Dan's right, South Australia is far ahead in renewable projects and storage and things like that. We've always been known as the innovative state. But unfortunately, the eastern states and the nationals don't acknowledge that. They don't give us credit to what we've done in South Australia. I think that's something that South Australia, we don't boast about all the innovation we've had here. And we are leading in technology in everything. And renewable energy, yes, I think as Ross Garno said, we are leaders in the world in that there. So again, I have full faith in both parties, like what Dan's saying there, to be able to go across there in an environmentally safe manner.
Does anybody, Dan or Andrew, you want to add to that? Or
Yeah, happy to Roger. The area you're talking about, Goyder's Lagoon, Callacoopa Creek, that area of the desert is incredibly precious environmentally, but it is also actually one of the most sacred areas from an Aboriginal cultural perspective that we have in South Australia as well. Not the only one, but one of the most precious and most untouched. So it's precious for a wide range of reasons. And in fact, the Wilderness Society, through the broader conservation movement, put as one of its highest requests going to the last election, protection of that area. And we've actually come to a very good compromise. And I credit Peter Owen and Craig Wilkins and also Minister David Spears for coming to this agreement where we've actually expanded the national park footprint very, very significantly in that area with an agreement that rather than excluding all minerals or petroleum exploration opportunities, as was the request, over the entire footprint, we have allowed it in a lot of the area, but we have given more exclusion and more protection than was requested of us down that Callacoopa Creek spine, essentially, and off to either side of it, so that rather than high protection across the whole thing, we've got medium protection across the whole area and extraordinarily high protection on the very, very most important part of that region. And I credit the conservation movement and David Spears in our government, and I had a part to play in that as well. I just think it was a very good example of collaboration to get a great result in that area. So to your question about the Beetaloo Basin and pipelines, we would take exactly the same approach to that. We would just look and see, well, is a pipeline practical? Is it sensible? Is it necessary? Can it be done responsibly or not? And we would just look at that. We would consider the project and the details of the proposal. We would make sure that the protections we put in place for that particular Callacoopa Creek spine would not be undermined in any way whatsoever. But for the other parts of it, which are also very, very well protected, but not to the highest possible way, we would look and see, well, is there a sensible way? Is there a practical way to let a pipeline go through that area if it was necessary to do so?
okay, you moved a bit on to the next question, which was the protection of Goyder's Lagoon and the Callacoopa Creek and the Coongie Lakes. Now, Goyder's Lagoon isn't protected under the Wilderness Act, that I understand. And you said there's some agreements around those. So, and I think they're suggesting we should go further.
Do you want me to?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Roger. Well, look, yes, there is a suggestion that we go further. There always will be, and there always should be. I think that's a very, very fair thing to do. And I'm comfortable that the things that we've done, whether requested or whether proactively, like single-use plastics and things, wherever we are, I accept and I respect the fact that the conservation movement will ask for more, and so they should. We've treated Callacoopa Creek district as I've mentioned. You're quite right about Goyder's Lagoon. That is a matter for consideration. With regard to the Coongie Lakes, they actually already enjoy one of the greatest protections that you can get anywhere in the world as a Ramsar listed site. And I remember, because while I wasn't a member of Parliament at the time, I was actively involved in this part of the state in other ways. I think it was about November 2007 when essentially complete exclusion was offered to the Coongie Lake. So, we've got three areas being treated in three different ways. I think it is entirely appropriate that the conservation movement always asks for more. I think it's entirely appropriate that our government continues to interact with the genuine requests of the conservation movement and their leaders in the way that we have. If I were to look back on our last 4 years, Do I think we've done everything that's been asked of us? No, I don't. Do I think that we've engaged extremely responsibly and done a lot of things that perhaps the conservation movement was pleasantly surprised, didn't expect us to do? I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. And if we are re-elected to government, that is exactly the way that we will continue to engage on these matters.
Okay. Andrew, you got any position on the protection of Goyder's Lagoon and the creek and Coongie Lakes?
Look, no, I'm not briefed on that. I'll have to revert to my learned friends on that point, I'm afraid. Okay.
Geoff?
Well, I appreciate what Dan's enlightened me on a lot of stuff there. I'm not 100% au fait on the whole lot of that there, but from Dan's conversation there and his comments, I need to get more information and understanding about that. And one of the things I'll have to do is talk to the Conservation Council and do a bit more. But I haven't, other than we need to make sure we protect lots of the areas and things like that. But certainly I don't think I could make any real good commitments or comments on that because I need to get more information about it, Roger.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question we turn to is Port Pirie and the lead issue, which has come back up in the press again. It's a persistent pollution problem in Port Pirie. Some of the levels are unacceptable. I know it's been around since I was working in that area. So what I heard on the radio, on the news, that they were doing something about it. So what's the position in the parties with TriStar? Geoff?
Well, it's we're Neostar. Look, Neostar have gone through yeah, that's right. No worries, Rog. Neostar are going through a transition period, and they're transitioning from the old technology to new technology. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. They have been there for over 130 odd years. It's a lot of inherited technology that was changed over the years. And the technology is changing. And a lot of the stuff they're doing now with the new TSL furnace, and also there's the what we call the pit area, where a lot of the non-lead bearing material is stored out there. And congratulations to the current government for giving some assistance to putting that under cover. It was a suggestion I made to the Minister, David Spears, about, it was probably about $15 million, and it was going to take them 10 years to do that. But I suggested giving some concessions or some grants, and the current government's done that, and I congratulate them for that, because that's going to bring all of that stuff outside in under a cover in sealed containment, and there'll be less transport across the whole site. The issue we've got is, and yes, there is a lot of children with the above the world limit of lead in blood limits there. But I believe that the plant itself is doing everything it can to reduce the emissions, the atmospheric emissions, and that's been from both sides of politics. I think that both sides of politics is what wants to get a load of this, and same as Port Augusta and Whyalla. We want to improve their lifestyles, but we now have to treat outside. And one of the things that I've got a concern with, we don't do enough vegetation out there, and I congratulate Dan for coming up with the $6.1 million just recently about the more vegetation and so forth. But we also need to understand that we need more water, and the affordability of water to actually keep this greening in place is a real issue to the local council. And to the degree I wrote to the Minister to see if SA Water could do some concessions for households that are in the maybe in an area that are finding it hard to maintain their lawns and stuff like that. So if we've got all of that, and then an actual fact is going to assist us. Another thing I've been suggesting to the council is that we've got a lot of inherited stuff in the ground, so we need to be able to seal that and cover that. So we haven't had a sealed footpath program in the city here for over 15 years now, or 14 years. And I think that's one of the things we need to do, is to seal our footpaths across from the curb to the fence line, so that we have no exposure. And once you've done that, you've got no dust problems and all of that. So again, it's working through it, but I asked the communities, I asked the media, I asked everybody to give us a chance to go through this transition. We all understand that, and both sides of politics understands the issue we've inherited, and we need to work our way through that. And I'll be working with both sides of politics. But again, congratulations to the current government for that $6.1 million, also for the part of the money in for the enclosure of what we call the non-lead bearing material, which was outside, but it was covered in a crust. So, but every time they went in to get it into a truck. We used front end loader. They broke the crust, so that's a dust issue. But again, happy to continue working. I was the mayor here. I worked down here for 30 years. I've got a great passion for that. I've got a great passion to make certain we get every technology going forward, and we just need to work our way through this as we have to do with renewable energy projects and not go bang, bang, bang.
Andrew, you got any comments? Thank you, Geoff. That was good. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Labour Party has historically backed the smelter, so that's not something that's unfamiliar to certainly to anyone here, presumably to any of your listeners. The historical lead issue has been noted by both sides of governments as an issue, as a safety issue, and indeed as an issue that has to be dealt with as best as it can. So the historical lead levels, certainly from the Labour Party, there is a commitment that there hasn't been a specified period in years of how long that commitment is going to go for, but there is absolutely no way that the Labour Party has any intention of withdrawing funding to clean up historical lead in Port Pirie. In fact, the opposite is the case, where they are very committed to supporting that. It's a safety issue. The safety issue is for probably our most valued and vulnerable people in South Australia, and indeed on this planet, and that's 0 to 5 year olds. So look, you know, it is very important. I think there's a chap by the name of Dolan from memory that
Peter Dolan.
Oh, yeah, Peter.
And he's look, I've spoken to Peter Dolan, I believe, and I've spoken to him on a few occasions, and he seems to be both the right man for the job. I accept it was the current government that picked Mr. Dolan, but look, he seems to have hit the ground running, knows what he is doing, and what he is doing is really important. What he is doing is actually educating the residents of Port Pirie and surrounds about lead and how to reduce lead in their blood, and in particular in the blood of their children. So yeah, look, critical. Hopefully the issue will eventually progress to the point where it doesn't always end bad publicity in the paper, because certainly at ground level it does seem that there is some forward movement, and it's positive. And yeah, in my submission, the Labour Party will continue to push that momentum and aggressively push that momentum.
Okay, Dan, thanks very much, Andrew. Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Roger. And look, happy to help again. One of the, with regard to lead in air, there are two key sources. One is what comes from the smokestack on a daily, weekly, yearly basis, and the EPA oversees, regulates that. And I don't get to instruct the EPA, but I certainly get to give them my opinions. And I've said to them that I think it's incredibly important that what we see is a consistent downward trajectory with regard to emissions from the smokestack. I would much rather have a shallow but non-stop downward trajectory than a steep downward, then say, oh, that can't be achieved, and go back up and down. So that's where that is. The other is, of course, lead in dust, legacy lead. Now, the smokestack emissions are an incredibly important environmental issue, without any doubt. But the greatest public health issue, what actually gets lead in blood, and particularly, as Andrew said, lead in blood in young children, is the legacy lead that's in the dust all around the town, some of which might have landed 5 years ago, some of which might have landed 125 years ago. And so we need to address that issue, because that is when the dust gets on windowsills and toys and playgrounds and footpaths and gets in kids' hands and then gets in kids' mouths. That's what creates lead in blood in children. So the targeted lead abatement program addresses that aspect of it, because that's the directly immediate health aspect of it. While I'm not the health minister, shortly after coming to government, Premier Marshall made me the lead minister for this area of work, and I made a very public, very clear commitment that we would make inroads in ways that have never been made before. Yes, all successive governments have looked at this seriously and known the importance of it, but it actually hasn't made a really big difference with regard to the results, and I committed that we would. We've done a lot of things. One of the first things I did was appoint Peter Dolan, and I agree with Geoff and Andrew. He's outstandingly good. He was, until very recently, the 2IC of the EPA. He's moved to Port Pirie. He lives in Port Pirie. He lives and breathes this work every day, and he's a terrific leader. We've done a lot of things. I won't go through the range of projects, but there's an enormous amount of additional finance and additional projects that we've put in, and I appreciate Geoff offering some credit for those things. And very, very happily, for the first time in a long time, the results of lead in blood in small children in Port Pirie, which were released on Monday, saw a plateau. Out of about 10 or a dozen different category measurements, 7 or 8 of them went down, 1 or 2 of them stayed the same, and there were 2 or 3 of them that got worse. So, you know, it is not good enough, but we are seeing the turn. We are seeing us get around the corner. This is something that will take decades to finish. We made a very clear commitment. Our government and the Near Star company have committed that when the current funding agreement runs out in 2024, we will extend that. Both of us will extend that for an additional 10 years, because we know this work is not finished. But what we started doing 2 and 3, and 1 and 2 and 3 years ago, is starting to show real world improvements for the lead in blood levels in Port Pirie, and I am determined. I'm determined that that continues to improve, and I know that I have the support of Geoff and Andrew in that.
Great, thanks. Thank you. Well, we'll turn the question now to the Great Artesian Basin, which underlies a lot of the area that you're on. This is a unique and fragile area with the Mound Springs. I'm a member of the Mound Springs group. Will you require a phasing out of mining extractions of the GAB waters as part of the Northern Waters project for the new marine desal water plant? This one was aimed at you, Dan.
Yep, thanks, Geoff. Look, the reason we're doing this is because we know that we need to take less water out of the GAB and less water out of the Murray as well. So we announced recently, it's work that we've been doing for a few years internally, what we are calling the Northern Water Solution. We want responsible mining to be able to continue to grow, and I'm talking about minerals here rather than petroleum. We need that to grow for our state, for our economy, for employment, but we also need it to grow because copper is the primary element that we mine in the Gawler-Creighton area, and copper is absolutely fundamental to the decarbonisation, not just in an energy sense, but broadly through the technical tools that are required and the physical tools. Copper, we need more copper if we want a cleaner world. So responsible mining we encourage, but we are not prepared to allow mining companies to grow by taking more water out of the GAB. In fact, we'd like to do the exact opposite. So we released about 2-3 weeks ago a memorandum of understanding between our state government, BHP, and Oz Minerals, the 2 largest miners in South Australia in copper mining in this area. And what we are investigating very thoroughly, we're a long way down the track, is desalination from the Upper Spencer Gulf, so that we can not only displace water that's taken out of the Gab, but also displace water that's taken out of the Murray, because Port Pirie, Whyalla, Port Augusta, and further west into the Eyre Peninsula all works with water that's piped from the Murray. So this is a double-pronged approach with regard to water security and leaving natural sources, one in the river, one underground, where they are. It's not to say we won't take any water out of the Murray or we won't take any water out of the GAB, but rather than increasing the take, we look to grow industry, grow employment, grow copper into the renewable transition by taking less water out of the Murray and less water out of the GAB through this Northern Water Solutions program, which we're developing in partnership with the federal government and the mining industry as well. We're well down that path. We're determined to do it, and that will help revive the Mountain Springs and the other things which Roger, you've said you're well connected with. So am I. It's important work, and we're determined to get on with it. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Andrew, you got any comments on that?
I've got a view on it. As far as on it, haven't actually received anything from the party. So as the candidate, I'm probably going to stay quiet on that in case I say it might be not quite correct. So I'll have to pass. Thanks.
Okay, Geoff, you haven't got a party to talk to.
I talk to both parties. I'll talk to both.
That's right.
Talk to all of them. Look, I said a bit earlier that the GAB was a big concern of mine, and I understand that where the current, the Liberal Party are looking at this desalination opportunities with the MOU with BHP and Oz Minerals. Okay, we've got to have more water up there, but the concern I've got is that depends where the location is. If it's in the Upper Spencer Gulf somewhere, we've had this before with BHP when they wanted to put one at Whyalla, and the big kerfuffle with the opportunity of the future of the cuttle fishing and things like that. But my information is the Upper Spencer Gulf in particular is one of the slowest turning over tidal locations in anywhere in Australia. Now, the federal government talk about these nation building projects, and that is absolutely fantastic because we've got to look at the long term, whether it's 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the track. My concern is we have abundance of water in the Bradford Field, Upper Queensland, and also the Ord River. Now, that's not utilised all the time. And one of the suggestions I put forward to ministers some 10, 15 years ago was why don't we bring some of that water down? Now, don't bring a lot of it down, but just bring enough down to be able to feed into the top end of the Murray-Darling Basin, and that would replenish that instead of the salinity opportunities. Because if we are not careful with the Murray, we're going to have salinity going back into Victoria and New South Wales. And then what we could do then is utilise that with an LNG, a natural gas pipeline coming in from the Northwest Shelf, bring that down, and then that would feed not only the opportunity for resources opportunities coming in. The rail line is going from Adelaide to Darwin. It's already got the transition there. It's done all the native vegetation and all the other issues. So if we talk about, and the comment to me was, oh, it's too expensive. We can buy water for $3 a kilolitre now. That might be $7 a kilolitre. But what is the cost if we don't look at this big opportunity? And we've got all of the stuff in the Northern Territory and also top end of South Australia. The pastoral companies out there, we're looking at the opportunities for more meat and exporting to the southeast, to the Asian countries and all that. I think that the federal government needs to start looking at that. And if it takes 10 years to build, let's take 10 years to build, and then we can utilise that for value adding. Now, Dan indicated the northern part of South Australia is rich in minerals and things like that. But the other thing, what we do is we dig it up, we put it on a ship, send it overseas, they value add, and then it comes back to us in a reformed condition. I think we've got to start looking value adding and manufacturing or processing our resources into a final product, and then export the final product overseas. But certainly, I'll be interested to see exactly how the opportunity go. And Dan indicated, I haven't seen the MOU. I need more information on how that's going to work. But certainly, I'd have to be very careful about how we put a desalination opportunity in a slow-turning Gulf. But certainly, I need more information on that too, Roger. Sorry about that.
That's good. Okay, we'll have one more question, and then I'll get each of you to summarise. The question is, what are your plans for incentivising electric vehicles in South Australia and providing facilities to make them an attractive alternative? I've got a vested interest in that because I'd like to change my car and I'm waiting for electrics. So who wants to start? Andrew, you got a Labor policy? You must have a Labor policy on. on
Yeah.
electric cars, electric vehicles, the transfer over. It's been very slow in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have. So it's I mean, it's essentially the Labour Party's policy is to stop the electric vehicle tax. So essentially, they're saying that the government should be doing all it can to reduce emissions from petrol and diesel vehicles. And I'm probably included in that. I'm not assisting with my diesel vehicle, and as such, to encourage South Australians to buy electric vehicles. So I mean that is where we are going. Well, certainly where we should be going. So anything that's legislated that would discourage that makes absolutely no sense. So so the Labour Party's policy is very clear. They want to stop that tax, and that, if it is enforced, will be enforced, as far as I'm aware, or it will come into effect in 2027. So Malinowski's government will repeal this electric vehicle tax before any electric vehicles can be taxed for the kilometres that they drive.
Okay. Geoff, you got views on this?
Well, it's a thing that we need to. I think we are slow with the uptake of electric vehicles, and we really have the opportunity to actually, instead of importing them from overseas, we should have the opportunity to actually manufacture them in South Australia. I said earlier, we're the innovation state. We've innovated, got great innovations and things like that. The tax is a deterrent. I have had concerns about the performance of some of these electric vehicles until I had the opportunity of riding in one, and they are absolutely fantastic, and they really is the way to go. We've got to make it as easy as we can for people to transition from the old fuel guzzlers, whether it's petrol or diesel, across into the electric one. But before we do that, we've got to make certain we don't reduce our. Currently, at the moment, you pay an excise on fuel. That should go into roads, but it appears not to be all of it goes into roads. A portion of it may be. Then there's the road registration, and so we pay that, which goes towards upkeeping of our roads and things like that. Electric vehicles are going to do the same thing, but we've got to make certain we don't make it too onerous for people to actually transition from the old into the new. So again, I think we need to look seriously at that proposed tax. I don't know how we're going to tax it. I know that the government have indicated, the current government have indicated there's certain ways of doing it, but look, I think we need to have more discussion on this, but certainly we need to make it as easy for people to transition. Otherwise, we're going to continue being the slowest uptake of electric vehicles in the world. And the other thing, even if we do it, we have very little charging points anywhere north of Port Wakefield. And I noticed the RAA have just recently announced quite a few things, but there's not enough charging facilities, and specifically up around in the potential areas of the Stuart Highway. If you go up there and you run out of fuel is one issue, but if you've got no electricity, it's another issue up there. So again, it's something we need to have a real think about it, and we need to do it in a consorted way and make sure we've got all the information, all the facts and figures, and do it in a very responsible manner.
Thank you. Dan?
Yes, can you hear me, Roger?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good, because I was looking at the chats and I've somehow mixed my screen up. So, look, very important issue, and we're right on it. To suggest that there's a tax to discourage the take-up of electric vehicles is completely wrong. The idea that when we have 50% electric vehicles and 50% petrol and diesel, that the petrol and diesel vehicles should pay all of the tax on behalf of all of the users is crazy. We do have a road user charge that we're putting in place, which would actually be $2 to travel 100 kilometres. When you put that road user charge across the average vehicle use, it means that the cost for an electric vehicle purchaser and driver would be exactly comparable to what it currently is. So it's basically saying that an electric vehicle user would have the same sort of charge that a petrol diesel vehicle would have at the moment. So to suggest that that's a discouragement is absolutely crazy. What we do have, though, is a $3,000 per vehicle stamp duty credit, so that it makes it cheaper to be able to buy an electric vehicle. We also have a $1,500 or a $2,000, depending on the equipment you choose, subsidy towards purchasing the equipment you need so that you can recharge at home and use your vehicle as not only something that you recharge at home, but you can put the electricity back into your house as well so that you can save on your electricity bill. With regard to charging network, we've actually just put over $12 million into a partnership with the RAA, which will provide 536 additional brand new chargers around the entire state, and the entire state being from the Western Australian border, east to the Victorian New South Wales border, up as far as the last service station that's available in the north of South Australia at Marla before you hit the Northern Territory, and hundreds of places in between. So we are breaking that nexus, that chicken and egg thing. You don't want to buy an electric vehicle till there's a charging network, but private industry won't invest in a charging network until you have enough electric vehicles on the road by investing. So that charging network is being rolled out as we speak. There is a very detailed plan for where those chargers will go. So we're incentivizing the take up of electric vehicles by making them cheaper to buy, by making them cheaper to use effectively in conjunction with your home. We are investing in the network. We're doing all of these things to incentivize the take up. The road user charge does not come into effect until 30% of new vehicles purchased are electric vehicles. So anybody who wants to get in, get one now, because the first 30% do not have that road user charge applied to them. It is only when electric vehicles become mainstream vehicles, when 35, 40, 50% and ongoing are being purchased as new vehicles, then they're mainstream vehicles, and yes, they will get the mainstream charges like any other vehicle. So a lot of incentives in place. I'm really proud of what we're doing with regard to encouraging electric vehicles in South Australia and the investments that we are making. And just to close off, please, Roger, people might wonder, why is the Energy Minister the lead minister for electric vehicles rather than perhaps the Environment Minister or perhaps the Transport Minister? It's because when the Energy Minister sees an electric vehicle, he doesn't only see a low or no emission means of transport, he actually sees a fleet of mobile batteries, which when aggregated together, when we've got thousands of them, then hundreds of thousands of them, they actually are another key component in our decarbonisation of our energy system. Electric vehicles are 3 or 4 times the size of a normal household battery. We've already rolled out tens of thousands of them. When we have tens of thousands of electric vehicles also working in sync, in aggregate, to optimise the use and the production of electricity, we are really taking another massive step down that decarbonisation line. And I'm really pleased with what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, the three of you being excellent and looking after each other as well, even though you're candidates. It's a problem. So can we just have just 3 minutes summary and then we'll close. So who would like to start? Geoff, would you like to start?
I think thanks, Roger. I think these forums are really good. First up, the community, whoever's watching gets the opportunity to see about the candidates out there. Let me make it quite clear at the start, even though this is an election period at the moment, both Dan and Andrew and the other candidates have got the right, everybody's got the right intention of standing to do something for our communities. And I congratulate everybody, not only in Stuart, but everywhere else that puts their hand up, and not only that, but also local government. Far too often, a lot of people say, not my problem, your problem. But it's not my problem, it's not their problem, it's our problem. We've got to work together. Look, I've been doing community work and things like that, and I've learned every day I go out in whatever I'm doing. I'm learning every day, and I make no bones about that. Talking to people, you actually get to understand their inner fears, what they're thinking about, and all of that. What we're doing, and I'm talking about how I feel very, very proud and very privileged to be able to represent people, whoever they may be, across not only in the old throne, but then not even the new Stuart, but anywhere in South Australia. And I'm committed to doing whatever I can to work with both major parties and also the other minor parties and also the crossbench in the Parliament of the day, and to make certain we all get the best results we can out of this, because there'll always be the argy-bargy in the Parliament in the question time and things like that. But outside of that, we need to be able to work very collaboratively together. And we may not always agree with it, but we've got to come up with whatever decision we come up with has got to be the best decision. The only way we're going to do that is to actually two things: talk to our communities, talk to the people, talk to the industries, but also we in the Parliament need to talk to each other and have honest and frank discussions without any retribution. But again, as I say, I'm very, very passionate about it. I've had a very, very privileged, when I say privileged, fortunate life. I had lots of issues, tragedies, but I am very, very lucky and very, very proud to have been able to serve my community back here at Port Pirie for the last, 44 years. But certainly it's, as I say, I'm privileged to be in the same company as Dan and Andrew and the other candidates for this election. And people will make the choice on who they believe will be able to represent them and communicate with them and to be able to serve them in the best way. And again, I wish Dan and Andrew and the other two candidates all the best for the election, and I'm hoping they don't win.
Thanks very much, Geoff. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks very much, Roger. And thanks, Geoff, and thanks, Dan. I think the forums that we've had of which have been quite a few, have actually been quite simple. And indeed, the difference is really our policies that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Geoff and Dan, but we are, we're all individuals that are trying to do the best, I think, for the community that we either want to represent or in Geoff and Dan's case are currently representing. So it's a policy issue, and indeed a lot of what politics is about is policy. And look, I just say this: we're talking today about such an important issue. Last night at this time, I was at a health forum. The Shadow Minister for Health, Chris Picton, and essentially I stood up and I said, "What can be more important than your health?" And indeed, I guess on reflection, if we don't have a place to live, then what does health matter? So here's the thought. The thought is, and I raised this at the start with the 3-minute introduction, and that was talking about the kids at school and the fact when I left school, there wasn't much talk about the environment and being good for it. But what we need to do in positions of authority or power, probably more prevalent today than ever before, given what's happening, unfortunately, in Syria, in Russia, is we've got to be doing what we've got to be essentially do as I say, not as I do. And if we do as we say but not as we do, then we are not the role models that we are trying to be. So I guess we do need to look at our legislation. We need to look at our policies. We need to make sure that we're not going backwards. We need to make sure that the energy that we're essentially letting off is beneficial, is clean energy, is something that's going to assist our children and their children. The hydrogen plant is but one example of a policy. The commitment by the Labour Party for 15 new Aboriginal Rangers is still, it's an announcement, but it's still it's a policy. The $3 million that has essentially been allocated to Friends of the Park groups by the Labour Party is a policy. All of these things, what I'm trying to say is all of these things hopefully will establish that the people that want to lead the Labour Party, that is hoping to get government in a couple of weeks' time, wants to practice what they preach, and so those policies hopefully show that.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Roger, and look, thank you for steering us through this evening, and
It's been
thank you to
great fun,
everybody who's-
actually.
Sorry.
It's been good fun. Yeah.
Oh, good. But look, appreciate it takes somebody to organise that. And look, we are a collaborative group. I mean, Geoff and I were friends before either of us were members of Parliament. We've been neighbouring MPs. We haven't agreed on everything, but we've always worked very well together. We're both getting to know Andrew a little bit, and he seems like a top bloke. There's no doubt about that. And of course, Beth Lees, the Greens candidate, is the fourth candidate for Stuart. And unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight. And there is another candidate, I apologise, I can't remember the name, and I haven't met that person. But look, the reality is that we all want to do a good job. There's no doubt about that. People listening, people tuning in and watching will be making some assessments for themselves about who they might like to have represent them in Stuart. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are not going to have a vote in Stuart who might just be trying to assess what do those three candidates represent on behalf of their parties, and how they might be judging the parties through what the candidates say as well. However that's happening, I'm very comfortable with. We on the environment, we don't have a put your head in the sand and hope the problems all go away attitude. And we don't have a highbrow philosophical approach either. We have a very practical, down-to-earth, let's get on and do the things we can do now. Let's do the things that we can do that are leading us into the future, both with regard to taking new opportunities, trying to repair previous decades' damage, trying to give people better lives and better futures, and just take our responsibility. Take our responsibility as a good government, which includes dealing with environmental issues. Do I think we've done a good job? Well, am I biased? Probably. Do I think we've done a good job? Yes, absolutely I do. Do I think we've done enough? No. Is there more to do? Yes. I am incredibly keen as a sitting MP, hoping to be re-elected, and also as a member of our government, hoping that our government gets re-elected. I'm incredibly keen for us to get to continue on doing the job that we're doing. And there will be people, no doubt, listening and watching at the moment, some of whom might even know who I'm talking about, who have said over the last year or two, oh, gee, goodness, Dan, we didn't really know what to expect from a Liberal government in South Australia after 16 years of Labor. And you've given us more than we expected, or we've been very pleased, or you're better than the other mob, or all of those different sorts of things. We have been criticised for not having done everything that people wanted. Fair enough, but we have also been complimented for doing lots of things generally well beyond people's expectations. And my colleagues and I dearly want the opportunity to continue in that practical, sensible way, one foot in front of the other, not dodging responsibilities, doing the best that we can for South Australia and Australia more broadly with regard to our environmental responsibilities. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. I think it's pretty hard that we have to actually select one out of all of you, because you're doing such a good job. And thank you very much. And Reese has swung us back, I think.
Yeah, I was just hoping to wrap it up and quickly say a massive thank you on behalf of the Nature Conservation Society and the Conservation Council. That was genuinely a fascinating and very interesting discussion. I think one of the comments in the chat by Patrick summed it up the best when he said, it is easy to see that each of these candidates is genuinely looking for the best for Stuart and for South Australians. And on a personal perspective, as someone that's relatively young, I think that it was really, I really enjoyed listening about the positive attitudes towards environment and climate issues. And yeah, we'll finish it up there. So massive thank you again.